Under the unforgiving New Mexico sun, the girl hung like a terrible secret, left for dead. Above her, letters scrawled in red paint screamed a curse. "White man don't forgive." She was a warning, a silent punishment in the vast wasteland. But then a figure appeared, a lone rancher carrying scars of his own. Would he heed the warning and ride on to save his own life? Or would he challenge the desert and the men who put her there, just to save a stranger? The New Mexico sky was an unforgiving furnace, and Calder Wyatt was just a lone speck moving beneath it. His ash-gray mare walked with a familiar tired rhythm, her hooves sinking into the fine dust of a land that had long forgotten the taste of rain. The stillness here was an almost tangible entity, broken only by the steady creak of saddle leather and the whine of the wind through the barren cactus shrubs. Calder was used to this silence. He found a kind of peace in it. But then, there was another sound. It was almost imperceptible, a faint whimper, like the sound of a broken flute played by the wind. He stopped his horse, his whole body tensing, tilting his head to listen. His heart seemed to slow a beat in his chest. The sound came again, a single desperate note, about to dissolve into the emptiness. He dismounted quickly, tying the reins to a desiccated branch. With his rifle slung over his back, he moved cautiously through the gnarled junipers and boulders. He headed toward a clearing ringed by ancient cottonwood trees. And there, under the canopy of the oldest tree, he saw her. She was hanging by her wrists, her arms stretched above her. Her body hung lifelessly, like a puppet with its strings cut, her feet barely touching the ground. Her skin was darkened by the sun and caked with dust. Her long black hair was matted with sweat and blood. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, erratic breaths. But she was alive. Calder's eyes snapped to the crude wooden sign nailed to the tree above her head. The scrawled letters, in a dark red paint that looked like dried blood, screamed an angry message: "White man don't forgive." He involuntarily took a step back, a wave of nausea churning in his throat. The air seemed to thicken, carrying a curse. He glanced around, scanning the ridges and rocks. Not a movement. Not a sound other than the wind rustling through the dead leaves like ghostly whispers. His hand went to the knife on his hip. "Damn it," he muttered. "What in the hell did they do to you?" The girl stirred slightly, her head lolling forward, and he saw the raw, bloody welts where the rope bit into her wrists. He swallowed hard. "You hear me, girl?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Number." Response: "I'm not here to hurt you," he said softer, almost to himself. His boots crunched on the ground as he moved closer. He could see her face now. Young, maybe 18, with high cheekbones and a strong jaw, but hollowed out from thirst. There was a smear of dried blood on her lip. He reached up, touching the rope. It was woven from a harsh, thorny fiber, made to inflict pain, not just to hang. The sign still seemed to scream at him. It echoed with crimes he had never committed, yet it made him feel guilty. It made him hesitate. But then another soft groan escaped her chapped lips, and that sound shattered all his hesitation. "Not all of them," he whispered, the sharp blade sliding through the rope. "I ain't that." The rope snapped. The girl fell forward, and he caught her just in time. Her body was hot, feverish, and startlingly light in his arms, as if she were nothing but emptiness inside. Her eyes fluttered open, wild, frightened, unfocused. Calder gently lowered her to the ground. One knee in the dust. He poured water from his canteen onto a clean cloth and dabbed her cracked lips. "Easy now," he said. "You're safe, for the moment at least." She blinked once, then again. Still no words, but her hand weakly clutched his sleeve. He looked at the sign one last time, then at her. He took off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. "You got a name?" he asked gently. "Suppose not. Guess we'll find one for you." He stood, lifting her with an effort. cradling her like something precious that was not yet completely broken. "For now you're with me." And with that, Calder Wyatt stepped back into the wilderness, carrying a girl marked for death and a secret heavy enough to hang a man. The sunset had painted the western ridges a blood orange by the time Calder reached his ranch. The place was just a resilient speck clinging to the vastness of the desert. A lone windmill creaked with every gust of wind, like a sentinel that never slept. The one-room wooden house, its roof patched with old sheet metal, stood firm and silent. Much like the man who built it, he gently lifted the girl from the saddle and carried her inside. The fever was burning her from the inside, her breath against his chest, dry and fragile like ash. He laid her on his only cot, carefully removing his coat from her shoulders. Her eyes opened for a moment, deep and distant, but they were watching him. The oil lamp cast dancing shadows on the wooden walls as Calder poured water into a metal basin. He set it down beside the cot, then grabbed a clean cloth from a shelf. He knelt beside her. Bruises and scrapes marred her legs. The rope burns around her wrists looked like brands. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his voice low, the words meant more to break the heavy silence than to expect a reply. "Just cleaning you up a bit." He dipped the cloth in the warm water, wrung it out, and then with a slowness that was almost a prayer, he lifted her right foot and placed it in the basin. Her body flinched, the reflex of a cornered animal. He paused, holding his position, giving her time to understand there was no threat here. When she didn't pull away, he began to gently wash the layers of dust and dried blood from her skin. His movements were precise and respectful, as if he were touching something sacred. The water in the basin quickly turned the reddish-brown of earth and dried blood. He worked in silence, trying not to meet her gaze for too long, though he could feel it on him, like a blade drawn halfway from its sheath, unsure whether to strike or retreat. Her lips parted once as if to speak, but then closed again into silence. "Reckon you don't talk much," he muttered, not unkindly. "That's all right. Silence is better than most things sometimes." He finished one foot, then the other. She let him. When he was done, he wrapped her feet in soft strips of cloth and gently placed them on a folded blanket. "You remind me of a creek where I used to camp," he said softly, almost to himself. It was dry most of the year, looked dead. But all it took was one rain, and it would roar and wash everything away. He looked at her again, studying her features in the lamplight. Cheekbones sharp as a ridgeline, lips chapped but full. She was too young to carry this kind of suffering, but there was something ancient behind her eyes, something that didn't flinch from pain, only waited for it to pass. "I'll call you Lena," he said softly, "just for now. You look like a Lena. Quiet, but strong." She blinked once, slowly. No protest. No nod. Just breath. Calder stood, his hands still damp, and reached for another blanket. He tucked it around her shoulders, then stepped back. "If you're hungry, there's beans. Ain't much, but it's better than air." Still no answer. He grabbed his bedroll and dragged it toward the door. He would sleep in the barn tonight. It wasn't just to give her space. The truth was more complicated. A strange man shouldn't be under the same roof as a woman in her situation, especially a man with ghosts of his own. Before stepping outside, he glanced back one last time. She had shifted slightly, her eyes closed, her lips no longer trembling. The basin of water still sat beside the cot, tinged with the color of what had been done to her. He picked it up, carried it outside, and tossed the filthy water onto the thirsty ground. The earth immediately swallowed it, leaving no trace, as if the violence had just been erased. Inside, the girl began to dream. Of fire, of horses, of ropes, cutting through the sky, and of a pair of hands, calloused but gentle, washing away the hurt without asking for anything in return. The following days passed with the slow rhythm of the desert. But the silence inside the house had transformed. It was no longer the emptiness of two strangers, but the heavy stillness of a shared secret. Lena, as Calder still called her, moved. Like a ghost in her own home, her eyes always alert, her posture always poised like an animal that had been caged for too long. She never spoke, but he often caught her gaze on him when she thought he wasn't looking. At night, Calder still took to the barn, his rifle beside him. He told himself it was to give her space, but it was also because he was afraid not of her, but of the world that had made her. That wooden sign still burned in his mind, an invisible accusation. They had left her as a warning, and they might come back to see if it had been heeded. His fear took shape one early morning. Beside the path leading to the barn, there was a boot print in the hard-packed earth. It wasn't his. Smaller, newer. The heel was worn in a characteristic way, leaving a square impression he'd seen 100 times. A military boot print. Someone had been here, sneaking around. He rose slowly, his eyes scanning the surrounding ridges. Nothing but sagebrush and the shimmering illusion of heat. Inside, Lena was sitting by the window, still as a statue. She didn't look at him when he entered, but her whole body tensed. "Did you see anyone?" he asked. She said nothing, only pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I think we have company," Calder murmured, mostly to himself. That evening he sat on the porch, his rifle across his knees. The wind had died, and only the distant howls of coyotes broke the silence. And then, as the day was ending, the unwelcome guest arrived. A thin trail of dust in the east, like a dirty finger drawn across the sky. Soon, a rider materialized, mounted on a chestnut horse, wearing the blue uniform of the authorities. Calder stepped down from the porch, one hand resting casually on his belt. The soldier reined in his horse, squinting down at him. "Are you Calder Wyatt?" "Depends who's asking," Calder replied, his voice even. "Lieutenant Graham, Dust Hollow Station. We're tracking a fugitive." The man pulled a folded paper from his breast pocket and handed it down. "Have you seen this one?" Calder took the paper, already knowing what he would see. The coarse paper in his hand felt like a death sentence. A crude pencil sketch, a few clumsy strokes that nonetheless captured the soul of the girl's eyes, wild and resolute. Below it were the words, "Wanted for murder and escape. Dangerous. Reward, $50. Calder slowly looked up. "Can't say I have." "You?" "Sure," the lieutenant pressed, leaning forward slightly. "A small girl, quiet, might be hurt, hiding. We think she was either rescued or taken by someone passing through the Cottonwood Flats." Calder held the paper for a second longer, then folded it and handed it back. "Haven't seen anyone, except for some jackrabbits and a stubborn cow." Lieutenant Graham narrowed his eyes, his gaze sharp as a hawk's, sweeping over Calder, the house, and the closed door behind him. "She's not just a runaway, Mr. Wyatt. She's part of a violent band of natives. That sign they left, they mean business." Calder's jaw tightened. "If I see anything, I'll send word." The soldier studied him for a moment longer, then gave a single nod and turned his horse. "See that you do." Calder stood there until the rider and the trail of dust had vanished into the horizon. He turned and went inside. Lena was standing just behind the curtain. She had heard everything. She stared at him, unmoving, her eyes a mixture of questions and confusion. He took off his hat and hung it on the door. "They came looking for you," he said directly, without beating around the bush. "They showed me a paper, said you were wanted." He paused, then added, "I said no." Her eyes narrowed slightly, a final flicker of suspicion battling a nascent hope. "I don't know what you did, Lena, and maybe someday you'll tell me. But out here, a man has to make his choices." He turned toward the stove, pretending to stir. "The long cold beans. I made mine." Behind him, she moved slightly, a small intake of breath. And in that moment, between two people hunted by the world, something stronger than fear had taken root. Trust. The afternoon sun hung low, casting long shadows across the yard. The wind had softened and the silence had returned, but this time it was different. Calder sat on the porch, slowly sharpening his knife, the rhythmic scrape of steel on stone. A dry, lonely sound. He focused on the repetitive motion, as if it could keep his mind from drifting toward the woman inside. Then he heard a sound. A light scuff on the gravel. He looked up. Lena was outside. It was the first time she had stepped beyond the threshold on her own since he brought her home. Her bare feet touched the ground, hesitant, as if testing whether it still had the strength to hold her up. The woven blanket he'd left for her was draped over her shoulders, trailing behind her like a second skin. She walked to the far end of the yard, to a patch of bare earth swept clean by the wind. There, she knelt, carefully, as if before an altar. Only then did Calder rise, setting his knife aside. He walked over, his boots quiet on the dirt, giving her a respectful distance. He stood behind her and watched. Her fingers moved with an almost sacred focus as she picked up a dry twig and began to draw in the fine dust. She wasn't drawing. She was carving a memory into the earth. In the dirt, the image of a bird took shape. Its wings spread wide in flight, but encircling it was a ring of fire like a burning crown. The lines were bold and sharp, filled with tension. The bird looked both alive and in agony, its wings angled upward as if trying to escape the flames, or perhaps to rise with them. Calder squatted beside her. His voice was low and quiet. "What is that?" Lena did not look up. Her face remained still, her eyes fixed on the drawing. For a long moment, as if deciding whether to release the memory, she said nothing. Then she spoke. "Bird in fire," she said. Her voice sounded dry and broken, like shattered pottery. "The sign of my people." She tapped the center of the bird with the twig. "This was my father's, our family's. We painted it on our lodges, carved it on our bows. Always flying and always in fire." She paused, the twig trembling in her hand. "They came, the whitecoats. Last spring," she continued, her words halting, "said we had to move. To a dry place, no water, no food. Said we were a danger." Her voice grew thin. "We said no, we stayed, we fought. They burned, they killed. My mother, my 2 brothers. They burned the elders inside the lodge." Calder's fists slowly clenched. "I ran, I hid. They found me, beat me, tied me. Called me a thief, said I took a rifle. I didn't." Then she turned, looking directly at him for the first time. A fury smoldered in the depths of her eyes. "I did not steal. I did not kill. I did nothing wrong." Her voice echoed in the open air like thunder in a dry season. Calder was silent for a moment, then his voice came, low but certain. "I believe you." Those 3 words were like a key, unlocking the dam of grief held back for too long. She turned back to the dirt, dropping the twig. Her shoulders began to shake, soundless at first, just silent tremors. Then the sobs broke free, raw and unrestrained. She curled forward, her arms wrapped around her knees, her hair falling like a black curtain. The pain was too large for her small body to contain, and it poured out in waves. Calder remained beside her, unmoving. He did not touch her, did not offer empty words of comfort. Instead, he reached out and pressed his palm flat onto the dusty earth, right next to the burning bird. His skin against the dirt she had shaped with her grief. It was not a gesture of pity, but of witness. Eventually, her breathing slowed. She lifted her head, her face streaked with tears and dirt. Their eyes met, unshielded. "You can call me Lena," she whispered. Calder gave a small nod, his voice like gravel and wind. "All right then, Lena." They sat together in silence as the sun slipped behind the ridge, and the image of the firebird in the dirt faded into shadow. But its ashes, like the truth, remained. That night, the small fire in the hearth crackled. The silence between them was no longer a wall. It had become a gentle, shared space. Lena stood by the window, looking out at the desert night. She turned suddenly. "Do you want to know why they hung me up there?" Calder looked up from the pot of beans and nodded. She walked to the table and sat across from him. "They hung me up like bait, to lure out any of my people who were still alive. Anyone still alive and still angry." She looked straight at him. "What about you? Why did you cut me down?" He looked at her for a long moment, the fire dancing between them. "Because once," he began, his voice flat, almost emotionless. "I didn't." Her brow furrowed slightly. "My family," Calder said. "Last spring, raiders hit the ranch. They said it was Apache. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. I was out hunting. When I got back, there was only ash. My sister, she was 16. I heard her crying in the barn. But I was too scared. I didn't go in. I waited for help. She was dead. Before anyone came." The silence that followed this confession was heavy with shared pain. "You saved me," Lena whispered, "because you couldn't save her." He gave a barely perceptible nod. She studied him intently, then asked a question that cut like a knife. "If I were white, would you still have cut the rope?" Calder slowly stood, walked around the table until he stood before her. He leaned down, gently cupping her chin in one hand. His fingers were calloused, but his touch was careful. "I don't love skin," he said. "I love what breathes beneath it." Her eyes welled with tears, but none fell. She reached up, taking his hand, and pressed her cheek into his calloused palm. And then, as if by instinct, they leaned into each other. The kiss began hesitantly, almost a silent question. Then it deepened, not as a taking, but as a release, as if both had been holding their breath for too long, and finally remembered how to breathe. Her hands trembled on his chest, his arms circled her back. Outside, the desert was quiet. Inside, something had begun to mend. The morning wind carried a change. It wasn't the whisper of the desert, but a hurried breath, carrying the scent of sand and foreboding. Calder felt it in his bones. 3 days had passed since the kiss by the fire, 3 days of a fragile peace. The silence was now not an empty space to be filled, but a common ground they shared. Lena had started helping him feed the mules, sweeping the floor, and once he even heard her laugh softly when he swore at a stubborn cow. But that peace was as thin as ice on a spring morning, and they both knew it. By noon, the trail of dust rose again from the east. This time, it was 3 riders. They didn't wear the blue of the law, but the faded brown of dust and waiting violence. Calder stood by the fence, his jaw set, his rifle leaning against the porch. The leader, a man with a self-appointed tin badge on his chest, reined in his horse. "Wyatt," the man growled as he dismounted. "Heard tell you're harboring something. That don't belong here." Calder kept his voice even. "People hear a lot of things, Joe. Doesn't make 'em true." Joe Prescott spat into the dirt. An Apache squaw. $50 reward, and the thanks of every God-fearing man in this territory. You want in on that? You came all this way for a rumor? Prescott's eyes narrowed. "We came to check, just in case." He jerked his chin toward the house. Calder slowly stepped down from the porch. "You have any papers, Joe?" Prescott snorted. "You think this is a courthouse, Wyatt?" His 2 companions shifted in their saddles, their hands moving near their weapons. The air grew brittle, ready to snap. "Only one who lives here is me," Calder said, his voice dangerously calm. "No girl here, just ghosts and goats." Prescott stared at him for a long moment, then gave a curt nod. "If you're lying, Wyatt, then when your barn burns, you'll burn with it." They turned and rode off without entering the house, but the message was clear. They would be back with more men and less patience. That night, Calder sat by a fire he'd built behind the barn. The stars were hidden by thick clouds. In his hand was the crude wooden sign he had dug up from the place where he had buried the sin of another world. The words were faded, but still there, hateful and damning. "White man don't forgive." He stared at it for a long time, his thumb brushing over the letters. Then he stood and carried it to the fire pit. No ceremony, no speech. He laid it among the kindling and struck a match. The flames licked at the hateful letters, the wood curling inward as if the hatred itself was writhing in protest. He wasn't just burning a piece of wood. He was incinerating a curse. Footsteps sounded behind him. Lena. She was wearing one of his old coats, far too large for her, the sleeves rolled up twice. She came to stand beside him, her eyes on the fire, not speaking. But her presence next to him, silent but solid, was its own answer. "I should have burned it sooner," Calder said quietly. She didn't reply, but moved closer, close enough for her shoulder to touch his. Her fingers knotted in the fabric of the coat. "Thank you," she said softly. The two simple words landed with the weight of something sacred. The fire burned low, leaving only glowing embers. The wind died to a hush. For the first time since he cut her down from that tree, there was no sign left of what had been written against her. Only heat, smoke, and the weight of the choice they had made together. The next morning, the air was thick and unnatural. Calder rose early, packing dried biscuits, jerky, and a canteen of water into his saddlebags. He had seen smoke on the horizon, too steady to be a campfire. Word had spread. Their time had run out. Lena stood by the fence line, her hair braided neatly down her back. Her face was calm, but her eyes held unspoken questions. "We have to go," Calder said, tying the final strap on his pack. "Tonight." She nodded. She already knew. "South, across the border," he continued. "They say the Apache people still live free in the Sierra Madres, far from soldiers, far from signs." He paused. "We can make it if we ride hard." Lena stepped closer, so close he could see the faint flush on her cheeks. She reached for his hand and held it, a firm, steady grip. He looked down at their joined hands, then up at her, his voice barely a whisper. "Will you come with me?" She pressed her forehead to his chest, her breath warm through his shirt. Then she looked up, straight, into his eyes. "I don't just want to run," she said, her voice clear and firm. "I want to live. With you as your wife." As the sun set, they were ready. 2 horses, 1 house left behind. They didn't look back. The house was now just a shadow, and the memories inside it also had to be left behind. Like footprints the desert wind would soon erase. They rode through the night, under the protection of the stars. The moonlight turned the desert into a world of silver and shadow, where every rock, every bush could be a hiding enemy. Lena leaned forward against her horse, her movements steady and practiced, as if she had been born to this land. Calder constantly scanned the ridgelines, his gut telling him they were being followed. And then the silence shattered. A dry crack tore through the night, followed by an echo that bounced off the cliffs. A violent jolt tore through Calder's side, hot and fierce. The sky and the ground swapped places as he was thrown from his saddle, hitting the hard earth with a thud. "Calder!" Lena's scream ripped through the air, no longer a whisper or a hesitant word, but a primal cry of loss and panic. She was off. Her horse before it had even stopped. He clutched his side, blood already soaking through his shirt. "Go," he rasped, trying to push himself up. "Just go, Lena." "No." Another bullet whizzed past, striking the rock behind them. They were exposed. They were being hunted. From the ridgeline, 2 figures appeared, rifles raised. "Have to move." Calder roared, the pain blurring his vision. Lena hooked her arm under his shoulder, using her whole body to lift him. Her strength, born of desperation, was astounding. By sheer force of will, they stumbled toward the nearby rocks. Calder's boots dragged behind him, each step an agony. Bullets chewed up the dirt around them. Somehow they reached a narrow gap between 2 cliffs, A hidden pass just wide enough for two people. Inside the shadow of the pass, Calder collapsed to his knees, his blood dripping onto the dust. He looked up at her, pain and wonder both in his eyes. You said ... You wanted to be my wife, he gasped, a tired, bloody smile flashing across his lips. She knelt beside him, cupping his face in her hands. I wasn't joking, she answered, wiping a mixture of tears and blood from his face. Then, he hissed through clenched teeth, we better make it through this pass. She nodded, a steely resolve replacing her fear. For the first time since they met, Lena began to pray, not to the god of the settlers, but to the spirits of fire, of wind, and of survival that had taught her how to live. Because love in this land was always a gamble, and tonight they were betting everything they had, including their lives. The hide tent rustled gently in the soft night breeze. Moonlight slipped through the seams, painting silver streaks on the dirt floor. Outside, crickets sang a low chorus, and water whispered over stones. Inside, Calder lay propped up unfolded. Blankets, his breathing now even and strong. The fever had passed. The worst was over. Lena sat beside him, a basin of cool water at her side. She gently wiped his brow. He watched her through half-lidded eyes, a slight smile lifting the corners of his mouth. Are you always this bossy with your patients? He murmured. She raised an eyebrow, but smiled back. Only with the ones too stubborn to die. He chuckled, then winced as the laughter pulled at the stitches in his side. She hushed him gently, placing a palm over his chest to steady him. The silence between them deepened, no longer awkward, but full of understanding. Then, as the wind sighed outside, he spoke again. Tell me something true, Calder said, his voice softer now, touched with a raw sincerity. What's your real name? Lena looked down, hesitating for a moment. Then she took his hand and guided it to her chest, right over her heart. Ayana, she said. It means peaceful river. It was my father's name for me. Calder closed his eyes for a beat, as if letting the name settle into him like a prayer. When he opened them again, there was a warmth behind the weariness. Ayana, he repeated, tasting the word. You're the only peace I've ever known. This time she did not cry. She only held his hand tighter. The seasons passed. On the southern edge of the territory, where the border blurred into mesquite groves and the dry wind carried scents of sage, a small lodge was built near a river's bend. It was made of pine and hide, strong but humble, surrounded by whispering. Reeds and wildflowers dot under its awning. Ayana sat cross-legged, stitching a tiny shirt. Her belly had rounded gently, visible now beneath her woven sash. She hummed quietly, her fingers moving surely and calmly through the soft cotton dot beyond the small garden. Calder was training a young mustang, murmuring low commands, patient and firm. Every so often he would glance back toward the lodge, catching her silhouette through the light curtain, and every time he smiled. The walls of their home bore no trophies or weapons, only bundles of herbs, 2 books, and a child's blanket waiting to be finished. One evening, Ayana walked down to the river, the same path she'd taken for months. The current moved slow and certain. She stepped barefoot into the shallows, letting the cool water kiss her skin, and laid both hands over her belly. Little one, she whispered, your father he didn't just forgive. He loved, and he kept his promise. Behind her, footsteps padded across the grass. Calder came to stand beside her, their fingers finding each other and intertwining without a word. Together, they watched the river drift under the dusk, where stars were beginning to blink into view. No one would have expected 2 hunted souls to find something like this. But somehow, in a world full of scars and storms, they had found and cultivated a quiet patch of earth, where love had taken root and blossomed. And the river kept flowing, peaceful like her name, like their life, like something finally, truly home.